What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, the place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration, along with music as well. I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter /X, I still call it Twitter, at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod 1. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr., of course. You can also follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for Perfect Plex Talk Radio, of course, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox, on Mondays at 6 p.m. So with this being said, thank you very much for those who are starting to tune in. Of course, those by way of Facebook as well as on Twitter. I'm also on YouTube, youtube.com/advanced here. Please make sure to subscribe for more great content. So with that being said, of course, before I get into all the wrestling stuff, I definitely want to talk about things pop culture wise. First and foremost, on Monday, I had an amazing time at the R&B Tour, Chris Brown and Usher concert. It was tremendous. Of course, they had 3 nights here in DC, so I was like, you know what, over here all this time, might as well get at least one in. But it was an experience in more ways than those who follow me on social media. You already see how I get down anyway. So yeah, of course, that was, even though I'm not gonna make it to the Jay-Z concert, if the Cards weren't my favorite, definitely would have, taken that trip, to Yankee Stadium in NYC for that. Especially since, my favorite Jay album is Blueprint anyway. My top 3 Jay albums, of course, Blueprint, Reasonable Doubt, and the Black Album. But it's neither here nor there. But as far as the concert, the R&B tour, it was spectacular. It was definitely they definitely put up Hall of Fame numbers. Very much pretty much like a 2 franchise players, if you will. Almost like a Joe Montana and Jerry Rice, combo, Magic and Kareem. Shaq and Kobe. As far as that, the 2-man power trip like Stone Cold and Triple H. That's how it was. And they definitely emptied the clip when it came to their catalog. Left and right, And so it's just like they did not disappoint at all. They left it all out there on the line. Even with the pyro. I don't know how many times there's flamethrowers and letting off that fire. I was like, and the thing is, I've been to WrestleMania, where there have been entrances that that have had fire. In other events, like I said, I've been to WrestleMania with SmackDown, where entrances, have had fire, but to do that many times, it's a scorcher, especially in the summer, to be letting off like that. I was like, yeah, they're definitely pyromaniacs. So of course, of course, Usher plays greatest hits, like I said, whether it's Confessions, you don't have to call, You Got It Bad, Superstar, you name it, whatever it is, you remind me, any and everything, Nice and Slow, he put everything out there. Like I said, Chris Brown, his catalog, left and right, no matter what. And not only that, but there's a lot of paying homage to Michael Jackson, who's the true, king, rest in peace, and to the point where Usher even had, I see one of the classic, one of the classic Michael Jackson jackets, and this dude, even put on the crown, and sat on that throne. I say, yeah, this as far as like the post MJ era, if you want to talk about successors to the throne, I definitely say it's Usher. And of course, Chris not that far behind him. And I'll say it like this: if I were to use a football analogy, football reference, I'd say my favorite position is wide receiver anyway, right? So if I were to equate them using football terms, right, NFL terms, Michael Jackson was Jerry Rice. I say Usher, Randy Moss, Chris Brown, say T.O. And I know that I remember when I put that, when I first made a post about that. There's some other people that chimed in and gave some great answers too. They mentioned Chris Brown to be Megatron, and some other R&B guys like Bobby Brown and Keith Sweat and stuff to be like, like your Chris Carter's and Michael Everett. I said, oh, all right, now we're talking. I said, all right, cool. I entertain that stuff. My thing is, as long as Michael, keeps the Jerry Rice title, of that equivalent, like unmatched, the greatest of all time. Numbers speak for themselves. And speaking of that, congratulations, by the way. I'm glad to announce that the Michael Jackson biopic has officially hit $1 billion in the box office, the highest grossing biopic of all time, greatest ever. From an experience standpoint to to a number standpoint. Like MJ moves the needle, whether he's here or not, no matter what. Even even when he's long gone, like I say, his streams are still the highest ever. Thriller is still the top selling album of all time. At the most, it's hit like 70 million worldwide. It's a needle mover, culture changer. It definitely transformed the trajectory of music as we know it in the future, right? And so if anything, that's what opened the doors for your Ushers, your Chris Browns, and and so on and so forth, right? And so like I say, like I said, as far as the experience at that concert, it was tremendous. It was mind blowing, even if it was on a Monday. I don't care. I was just like, what, let me just be in the building. And the funny ththing is, I ended up getting my ticket at the very last minute, like 4 hours before the show even started. But it was a miracle, because there are times, like on the day of, that he's like super duper like last minute tickets. At first, I used to think, like everything would be sold out the day of, but but oftentimes I found out that's not the case. Still people getting tickets. Like I say, pretty much like a walk-in. Like last call, like last call tickets, whatever. And so I said, all right, cool. Let me go check that out. And matter of fact, they like I say do that. This, they did that with John Cena's last match. All those things. I've even got a last minute ticket for for one of the Cowboys and Washington games over here, at FedEx Field. You know what I mean? So it's nothing new to me at all. So been there, done that, and it's still an amazing experience no matter what. Yeah. So like I said, like I said, as far as that, I mean, those two are absolute legends in their own right. Tremendous performers. Their mics were on the whole time. And of course, would the Chris Brown concert be without him, getting on the harness and swinging left and right like he's Spider-Man. You know what I mean? He definitely. As a matter of fact, he even had a Spider-Man jacket on one of the nights. It might be Friday, I want to say it was. And so, like it was red and blue. And I saw on Instagram. I said, yeah, that's Spider-Man jacket. Like I said, as far as that, like when it comes to acrobatics, and also I even thought about Nightwing. You know what I mean? Thought about Spider-Man, Nightwing, and Daredevil. Whenever Chris Brown was doing, going from the harness, as his song says, swinging from wall to wall, right? But yeah, like I said, it was tremendous. It was mind blowing. It was absolutely amazing. I was like, what? I cannot miss out on this summer greatness. I mean, I'm not going to be having no FOMO, fear of missing out. It's like absolutely not. That's how I roll anyway. As long as it's in the cards, make a way to be outside. And so yeah, that's what it is. Because my motto, I always like to say, is don't just count the days, but make the days count, and that is included in there as well. So moving on, I'm going to talk about X-Men 97, episode 5, Weapon X, Lies, and DVDs. So if you have not seen it yet, might want to turn away. Spoiler alert, if you will. You know what I mean? And I'm just giving out there because I guess I have a little bit of a reputation, if you will, on fair or unfair. But yeah, like I said, when it comes to like I said, if you haven't seen it, I strongly suggest that you step away from this and check it back out on the replay after you've seen the episode. So, like I said, it's called Weapon X Lies and Videotape, and Weapon X Lies and DVD. Excuse me. Because the original, like in the original animated series, there was an episode called Weapon X Lies and Videotape because it was because the title was based off of a movie back in the day, at that time, called Sex Lies and Videotape, right? And I like how how they take some of these movie titles and remix them and turn them into episode titles. TMNT, I said back in the day, TMNT used to do that as well. But yeah, it's same thing with X-Men. So anyway, like I said, to backtrack. So in the original Weapon X Lies and Videotape episode, that was that was telling the story about Wolverine was in the Weapon X lab and how he got his got his adamantium, right? And how it was a Weapon X lab experiment, and of course him teaming up some other former Weapon X Weapon X members like Maverick, like Lady Death, Lady Deathstrike and stuff like that. And so so in this episode, it was very much the focus was Weapon X. Much like, even though they didn't have their own intro like X Force, I thought that was cool. Much like how X Force episode 2, they were the team that was the main focus, right? To the point where they even had their own special intro, right? I can see X Force once again consists of Cable, Archangel, Jubilee, Psylocke, and Sunspot. And so for Weapon X, you have Wolverine, Sabretooth, surprisingly. And, of course, this is aftermath X-Men 97. So by this point, they've already been rivals, but somehow that they reunited to be part of the Weapon X team. And because what happened was, for those that don't know the comics, before they became arch enemies, Wolverine and Sabretooth used to be part of the Weapon X team together. They're part of that group. And so somewhere down the line, they ended up having a really bad fallout, and that's how they became blood enemies ever since, right? So they both part of the Weapon X experiment. Both have adamantium and everything like that. But yeah, like I said, the Weapon X team consists of Wolverine, Sabretooth, Lady Deathstrike, Maverick, another character named Kane. I wasn't really too familiar with him. And so, as far as Kane, they also had Morph. And the thing is, of course, they find themselves in Canada. That's where Weapon X Lab is anyway, right? Like I said, Wolverine, Sabretooth, Lady Deathstrike, Lady Deathstrike, Maverick, Kane, and also Morph tagged along. So by this point, they've gotten back from that future timeline, with a much younger Cable, back when he was Nathan, right? So by this point, they've already gotten out of that. And at the end of the last episode, they showed Wolverine, of course, reunited with Captain America, Captain America and Black Widow, right? But in this case, like I said, this very much Wolverine centered episode, and I knew there was going to be a point in time where he was eventually going to get his adamantium claws back. Well, with the way this episode turned out, I even saw some like a description of it, whatever they said it was going to be compared to very comparable to to Aliens in the Predator movies, and it definitely was. It was very much a a horror movie episode, much like was it that crazy episode 4 from last season. Was it Madeline Pryor, and they just like it just looked like they turned the Xavier's mansion. That place looked like it was straight from hell. You know what I mean? I was like, oh my gosh, like that, like I said, that episode 4 from not I think it was no, episode 4 is the Jubilee episode. I think it's like episode 2 or 3. Dealing with dealing with Madeline Pryor. That for those that know, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, like that was nightmare fuel. But this one right here, it was, like I said, like the thing is, this episode was another horror-filled episode, but it wasn't as nightmare fuelish, even though there were elements, to the point, Wolverine had gotten infected, and so so I figured that the main focus, was about him getting back his adamantium, because eventually he was going to, he's going to get it anyway, like I said before. And so anyway, he ends up getting infected, and so so it's like just like this crazy monster looking thing, and of course Morph, being the comic relief, and also the one who's knows how to cool off the temperature in the room, if you will. Finds a way to get Wolverine's attention, to the point where he even transforms into Cyclops, and especially when that Wolverine can't stand that dude, so why not? And so he ends up stabbing Morph, and Morph turns into Jean Grey, and so we know that Jean Grey is Wolverine's kryptonite, and so from to keep Wolverine from killing him altogether, he turns into Jean Grey, and that's what that's what gets his attention. So that was enough, for them to get Wolverine, into Weapon X2 or whatever, and eventually ends up getting injected with the adamantium, and by the way, the main villain is Omega Red, and Omega Red is him. He is that dude. In this episode is further proof of that, as we saw like at the end of episode 1. Like I said, it was one of those episodes. I think it was one of the Bastion episodes or whatever, where they like there was a one episode where they had the different cameos. They showed Doctor Doom. They showed Omega Red. They showed what was it? Like something they showed Silver Samurai, like Iron Man and Cap. You know what I mean? They showed like Spider-Man. One of those episodes, like I said, they showed Omega Red, and I was like, all right, cool. So now, and then we end up seeing what he can do, and like as a matter of fact, when Wolverine and Sabretooth were in Weapon X, Omega Red was their enemy. And so it was great to see him get the shine, and of course, eventually Wolverine gets his adamantium back. And it even does, of course, the tribute to the Frank Miller cover. He, of course, sticks out his claws, and he's like, we're back, baby. You know what I mean? And I was like, yeah, this is the point. This was the turning point right here. And so of course, they defeat Omega Red, escape the Weapon X lab in Canada, and like I said, as far as that. It has a very strong case of probably being just good, not better than last week's episode. And that says a whole lot. I would say in terms of my top, what was this episode 5? So it's just like I have my top 3 out of 5 episodes. I would say last week's Apocalypse episode, where Apocalypse kills Magneto. I will go with the Jubilee X-Force episode, and I'd probably go with this one. Actually, I'd go with Apocalypse killing Magneto, this one, and then I think and number 3, top 3 definitely have to be the X-Force episode. Jubilee just throwing hands and feet, like I said, putting hands and feet on those ice agents. So, like I said, those are my top 3. And then I would go with probably like episode 3 and then 1. So those are my top 5. We're talking about, if we're talking about if we're ranking these last 5 episodes right now. That's how it would go. You know what I mean? So as far as that, like, it's just go show that the X-Men continue to raise the stakes. That series, show continues to raise the standard when it comes to comic book animation. And as great as Invincible is, I would give X-Men. I would give X-Men 97 the slight edge. And really, like, if anything, because it builds on a classic series anyway. The X-Men animated series, already had a huge following and fan base anyway. But now they have progressed and made more mature storylines, and that's the great thing about X-Men. Like, not only is animation on point, but the storytelling, especially, is vital. It's critical to the success of that franchise. And so, and that storytelling is always hitting the home run. It's shout out to to that the All-Star game yesterday as well. Matter of fact, SB's on right now. Yeah, just started. All right then. So of course, as far as that, but like I said, I'm not gonna pull up the rest of my time. But of course, I'm gonna run through some of the some of the SmackDown, some things that happened on SmackDown. Of course, the recap of CM Punk return to SmackDown as a champion, and so of course Nick Aldis talked about what happened with Gunther, Night of Champions, subsequent suspension before welcoming CM Punk to the ring to celebrate being the new WWE champion, and of course Punk, of course you say you give Sami Zayn a rematch if you wanted one. Of course, he also named people like Gunther, Finn Balor, Horace Keys, Damian Priest, and Trick Williams before he was interrupted by Cody. He was clearly upset about what happened on Monday. He was attacked and unable to have a scheduled title match against Sami. And of course, Punk, was a last minute fill-in. You know what I mean? So as far as that, but of course, like I said, as far as that, with Rhodes being Punk's first challenger isn't really a surprise, and the exchange was a little on the uneventful side. So it's definitely gonna be interesting to see how this fills time, with this feud between now and SummerSlam. And of course, you got a Saturday night's main event coming up very soon. This Saturday, actually, in Times Square, Madison Square Garden. But like I said, this segment didn't really do either one of them any favors. We see Finn Balor versus Tama Tonga, and Finn Balor defeats Tama Tonga. Jimmy Uso versus Royce Keys. Of course, the winner of that match is Jimmy Uso. Then we have Alexa Bliss versus Jade Cargill. Of course, Jade Cargill wins dominating fashion to the point where she even broke Alexa Bliss' arm with that. Of course, by bending it through that chair, I said, yeah, this is definitely, really, building that eventual heat between Jade and Charlotte. So I think that's really penciled in for SummerSlam. I can't wait. Then we have, of course, Trick Williams versus Carmelo Hayes. That match ends up in a no contest as we see the return of Baron Corbin. And of course, as he inserts himself into this, and now it feels like this Trick and Melo, obvious storyline is pretty much put on the back burner for the return of Baron Corbin. And so it's pretty much, not much, to write home about when it comes to SmackDown. Now on, of course, now when it comes to the side of Monday Night Raw, so now here we go. I think Monday Night Raw is definitely a little bit more spicier, compared to SmackDown. And so we saw that this contract sign. We see the contract sign between Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns. Brock Lesnar makes his appearance. And we have the number one contenders gauntlet match with Chad Gable versus Dragon Lee versus Javon Evans versus Joe Joe Hendry versus Ethan Page versus Rusev versus Dirty Dom Mysterio, and of course also Io Scott versus Roxanne Perez. So of course we see that that Monday Night Raw was kicked off by the Beast himself, Brock Lesnar, as he enters the American Airlines Arena to kick off Monday's show, accompanied by none other than his advocate Paul Heyman, along with a whole bunch of police as well. So of course, obsession was the theme of the night's opening promo. As Heyman called out Femi for being obsessed with Lesnar before admitting that the Beast is obsessed with the ruler and facing him inside the Hell in a Cell. It was against that backdrop that the advocate filed for a restraining order against Oba Femi, and of course, shout out to Oba Femi for shout out to Oba for shout out to Oba for sharing that meme of Brock running away from him, and I thought that was pretty funny. You know what I mean? So I was like, yeah, pretty much. So I was just where Oba's pretty much telling Brock, what are you running for? You know what I mean? So so as far as that, so that the King of the Ring arrived on scene anyway, and ran through the police officers, or police officers before yelling out, "You can't run from Oba Femi." So I can't really do the accent like that, but yeah, as you said, we've heard the Lesnar and Heyman side of things before, with the twist of the form with with Lesnar's obsession with Oba brought up for the first time, and it's definitely all about Oba though. Continue to answer the call and deliver excellent mic work. His mic work has definitely gone up even in the midst of this program. So he was definitely fiery, passionate, made his point, and the fans definitely roared as he wrapped things up. The only thing though is that he officially relinquished. So the thing is, he officially relinquished his title shot. So of course, with being the King of the Ring, that means you're number one contender. So he forfeited, his number one contendership, for a potential match at SummerSlam against Roman. So I was like, that's definitely a very short-sighted thing, and it's like the long-term effects of it. It's definitely not worth it. You know what I mean? So, and the thing is, typically, somebody who's the King of the Ring, they're definitely front runner for a title shot. I mean, Brock Lesnar himself, when he won King of the Ring, Brock Lesnar himself, when he won King of the Ring, he defeated The Rock at that following SummerSlam. So you'll think the history will repeat itself. In this case, not so much. So if anything, I don't know. That's gonna be unnecessary hindrance to to Oba's just rapid momentum going on. All for the sake of putting down a washed up 49-year-old Viking in Minnesota inside the Hell in a Cell. I'm like, come on now. You could still put Brock down, while still maintaining that the title shot. Like, no, it's not it. We see Io Scott versus Roxanne Perez, and Io, of course, obviously, obviously the winner of this match, Io Scott, even in spite of, of course, Judgment Day, being around the ring, you know what I mean. So as far as that, and the fact that Liv Morgan, was even in the Queen of the Ring, that's just served no purpose at all whatsoever. So you see Slick Rick at the Essence right now. It's great, by the way. Legend himself. But yeah, the one on Slick Rick. And so we see this Vision promo, and of course, fresh off Maxine Dupri's surprising alliance with Vision last week. Of course, the former women's Intercontinental Champion made her way to the ring alongside her new beau, her new bae, Austin Theory, along with Braun Breaker and Logan Paul. And before they can even explain themselves, Otis and Kira Tozawa interrupted to confront Maxine about her actions, how she betrayed Alpha Academy. As Otis was about to express his feelings, his disappointment rather, Officer Theory made fun of him, instigating a wild and chaotic brawl that concluded with the big man squashing and destroying Braun Breaker. And of course, saw that that Dupree saved Theory, stepping in between him and Otis, and she manipulated, of course, long enough, for Otis to get hit with a low blow. And so she embraced Theory, then watches the Vision dealt final blows to Alpha Academy. And so it's official, Maxine Dupree is now part of the Vision. This has been her heel turn. And also at the same time, we've seen that there are reports that Braun Breaker is very disgruntled with his place on the card. Disgruntled with his place in the company. In terms of his direction. But at the same time, you can also say that there's only so many spots on the card that you could be in. Some of those positions definitely need to be filled, and but it just goes to show the gap between him and Oba Femi. And so it's just gotten to the point where Oba has just been flying right past Braun. So at first it seemed like they were going to be like neck and neck, but now there's definitely definitely some space, several like I said, several feet of space, if you will, in between them. You know what I mean? So if anything, I would say you have Oba and Trick. If anything, they've already flown past Braun at this point. So I feel as though they should really pull the trigger for Braun Breaker in those matches against CM Punk and Seth Rollins, but clearly that was not the case. You know what I mean? And so like I said, as far as that, so of course, like I said, we saw that Worst Keys versus Jimmy Uso, and saw that that Worst defeated Jimmy by way of disqualification. But yeah, like it's especially with by way of interference with LA Knight. So yeah, as far as that was concerned, slow down, of course. But of course, saw that it's great to see see Keys get increased exposure as of late, especially in a spot in the Bloodline story. And so of course we saw that the Solo and end up knocking out Jimmy with the thumb, and we saw that that Jacob Fatu aligned with Solo once again. I was like, all right now, all right then, it's definitely like I said, this Bloodline match is definitely getting very interesting. And we saw that Bayley called out Lyra Valkyria, and Lyra just out here looking crazy and disheveled. You know what I mean? Like looking like a zombie. And she answered Bayley's call and assaulted her, taking several jabs at her before admitting that every compliment she paid her former tag team partner was a lie. And to the point where she was even calling Bayley the worst horsewoman of the group. I said, whoa. And I was like, man. I mean? Like, and of course, there are people online who were saying that they had, had it not been for Nia knocking out Becky, that Becky would have been fourth on that list herself, but that turned out not to be the case. And of course, Bayley vowed to kick Lyra's butt off, all around Madison Square Garden. Of course, it's going to add that to a list of accomplishments, and it was definitely a very focused and well executed segment. And with Lyra trying to go for a cheap shot, only for Bayley to counter her. But eventually, of course, Lyra got the better of the future Hall of Famer and stood tall to close out this segment. So Lyra's definitely worked on her promos over the last year. Because recent performances, on the mic have been great, especially Slam. Especially when you're in a program, with someone of the caliber of Bayley. So you definitely have no other choice but to step the game up. And then when it comes to the number one contenders gauntlet match, we saw that the winner of this match, for the gauntlet is Chad Gable. So that means, of course, we saw that first Rey Mysterio defeated Joe Hendry. Then we have Javon Evans defeat Rey Mysterio. Javon Evans defeat Dragon Lee. We see Rusev defeat Javon Evans. We saw that Chad Gable defeat Rusev, and Chad Gable will end up defeating Ethan Page, in the finale. And so it's inevitable that that Chad Gable ends up becoming the Intercontinental Champion. This guy is literally Kurt Angle Jr. anyway. But I feel as though they really need to pull the trigger even more with someone like Javon Evans, especially with his high risk move set, his arsenal. So it's just like it's best to to pull the trigger on him right now. Even though he's admitted that that eventually eventually he wants to tone down his move set and his approach. Because it's very high risk, and you definitely don't want to have any type of a freak injury. Even if he's super young, it's easy for him to recover. But at the same time, wrestling like that for a guy as tall as him, that's bound to take years off his career, and definitely don't want to do that. So as far as that, and so I think that you really need to tap more into what Javon can do as a character standpoint as well. His mic skills are definitely on point anyway. Of course, we saw that was evident in NXT anyway. And then we see a vignette for Big Cass. Looks like he's going to be on his way back to WWE. For potential August 3rd arrival. And last but not least, the contract signing between Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns. And so the visionary, as they sat inches apart from each other, the visionary Seth Rollins says to the tribal chief, he says that there are some certainties in life. Death, taxes, and Seth Rollins beats Roman Reigns every single time. That's not really the case because, the internet has receipts and Roman has defeated Seth a number of times. But the main story, I think the main narrative about this is that Roman has not beat Seth on a PLE for the title where it really matters the most. That's what I take away out of this, because there are a lot of complications with this, but ultimately when it comes to PLE standpoint, formerly known as pay-per-view, when it comes to those matches, oftentimes Roman is falling on the short end of the stick. So that's why I get out of it, right? And the thing about it is that the records speaks for themselves, no matter what iteration of the character they're still Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins, whether it's the big dog versus the architect, whether it's the tribal chief versus the visionary, whatever the case is, their record speaks for itself. So with the way that Roman's schedule is, it looks like he's being there on a more consistent, constant basis, right? So it's not like he's showing any signs that he's going to be going away anytime soon. So with that being said, I am going with the tribal chief to win this match and to get this, as I said before, get this Donkey Kong off his back when it comes to Seth Rollins beating him in PLEs for a title. And the thing is, the last time they got into it for a title was as I said before, previous episode, in 2022, and Roman's anger got the best of him, and he got himself disqualified. Right. So I'm looking at it as, especially when you consider that the Roman has been having several matches where he has won by himself, whether it's whether it's against CM Punk, Jacob, you name it. So I think this is a different iteration of the bloodline where he doesn't need. We won't see as many interferences. So
So if anything, he's definitely changed that narrative. So that being said, I see the Tribal Chief get the W and still being your reigning, defending world heavyweight champion. But before I get ahead of myself, I got a little bit too ahead of myself. But yeah, like I said, of course, as I said before, Seth said that there's some certainties in life that taxes Seth Rollins beats Roman Reigns every single time. Of course, as I said, Seth sat across from his brother / arch rival with a contract for the World Heavyweight Championship right between them. So Monday night, however, it was Reigns who was the master of the mind games and caused Rollins to snap, as you referred to him as number 2. I know several people, who feel some type of way about that. Shout out to Mimi for Black Wrestling, among several others. Like Zena. I know there's people who feel some type of way about Roman saying that, but I think that is more so based off of not only IWC's narrative, but even especially more like deep down feels more of a company narrative. That feels more like a company narrative where they, where Seth is not held in the same regard, even though he's super available. But at the same time, though, even though Seth has had Roman's number when it comes to title matches at PLEs, the follow-up is never that great. Even it's just like, even after you get these wins on Roman, now what? The payoff is never really there. Even though he had a pretty solid, first title reign. I'm talking about like when he won the first time with the cash in. Unfortunately, his body was not able to hold up, and he got injured back in November of 2015. Very late 2015. It was a house show, and he was sidelined and missed WrestleMania 32 the first time in Dallas. And so that was the one where there was a lot of people that were on the shelf that year, and that was the same night the Roman beat Triple H, and so Seth didn't come back until like May or June, right? So he's had a track record of his body breaking down, even in the midst of these big championship pushes. You know what I mean? So as far as that, and then not only that, but those even a promo before when Roman was the WWE champion. This is during his 13-16 day title reign, where he was talking about he was kind of promo on Seth, and he was talking about Seth. Whenever when he was champion, his body breaks down, can't handle carrying the show, and whatever the case is. So that has always been there. Even Seth himself has admitted, that Roman, has had a greater career than him. You know what I mean? So it's just like that number 2 stigma, and the thing is, like I said, I take nothing away from Seth's career. He's a legend in his own right and everything. But when it comes to the company hierarchy, there are levels to this stuff. You have Roman, who is the figurehead of his generation, much like how Austin and Rock were side by side. Cena was the figurehead for his era. You know what I mean? And so like I said, as far as that, and everybody's not gonna be Mario. You got to have Luigi. There's nothing wrong with Luigi, but come on now, we know who player 1 is, and so I think that narrative was definitely front and center in what Roman said. I said, ooh, yeah, what I mean. And so and not only that, like I said, the thing is, not only did Roman say that Seth could not walk in his shoes, despite his work daddy Triple H basically running the place. Even though Seth could have clapped back and mentioned Roman's going to work daddy, freak nasty and get himself, ousted from his company, put in exile, and was dealing with that Janelle Grant case and all them allegations. So say Roman's work daddy's got his hands tied up right now. Roman's work daddy's redacted and not in the company no more. But of course, Seth did not hit the low blow in that area. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, Rollins attacked Reigns and came back from the Superman punch and dropped the world champion pedigree, stomped before Stan Tall to close up the show. The segment was all right. A little long-winded, if you will. And we see that Roman playing mind games with Seth was a nice touch to get the often scenario has been flipped because Seth has done that to him all the time. But now Roman is playing the Jedi mind trick and flipping the tables on him. And Seth doesn't like it when somebody plays his game, and does the same thing to him. So we see that with Roman, right? But also at the same time, that's not enough of an incentive for me to, to want to see Seth come out with the win. It's really not, because Seth has spent his career, outside the Shield trolling Roman. And now he's gotten taste of his own medicine. So he reaped what he sowed, plays stupid games, he wins stupid prizes as far as my estimation. You know what I mean? So it's just like, Seth is not exactly the most sympathetic figure himself in my estimation. Even though, of course, one of the top Roman fans I know of, shout out to Mimi, she just mentioned that she's at peace, with Seth beating Roman. I said, really? So you cool with Seth being his kryptonite? She was like, yeah. I was like, man, but I guess because of the fact that the Roman has more of an ironclad career and there's not much, he doesn't have that much to lose. I mean, that's cool. I think in my estimation, I just think in terms of just that, just the natural bragging rights thing, it just, it's just something cool to have, especially when you look at, when Rock finally beat Stone Cold at WrestleMania 19. Even though they've battled back and forth with the title outside of WrestleMania, but with Rock, to finally get that off his back. I'm thinking that that's going to be the same thing when it comes to somebody like Roman. And so thinking that's what I look forward to seeing. So yes, as far as that, and was like as far as that, I would say that was the highlight of Monday night. The contract signing, and but also at the same time, of course, the fiery piss off Seth Rollins. That'd be a great look for him as a challenger in a match against Reigns that few expect him to win. So there's very few that expect Seth to win. Even though he's, like I say, he's had Roman's number when it comes to title matches before. But I think because it's like Roman's it's become even more of a juggernaut than ever before. You know what I mean? So it's definitely making Seth look more like an underdog, but at the same time, I always go back to say that we wouldn't be in this position right now had Seth not put that chair to Roman's back and destroy the Shield, one of the arguably greatest group of all time. So yeah, like I say, all this was a butterfly effect, a ripple effect, all from a chair to the back. And look at where we are now. So yes, it's like I said, as far as that. And another thing too, even before I wrap up, is the IWC continues to tell themselves they continue to be messy and just be real inappropriate. Like I said, when it comes to this news about Jey Uso's divorce and just getting all of this business and having these AI generated fake Jey Uso accounts. We all know good and well the Usos share the same Twitter account. It's called WWE Usos. It's, both of them together. And we saw this AI generated Twitter account that was just crashing out. It was very deceiving, and so I was like, yes, it's definitely way too much. And like I said, just and clearly it was somebody within the company that was leaking all this stuff, about Jay and his personal life, and not only that, but also when it comes to, like I said, these fans need, just need to respect boundaries. They need to, like I said, I guess it's asking for too much, for the IWC to, to be reasonable and to make sense, because clearly too many of them don't. Too many of them, don't understand boundaries and hygiene and just reading the room, because otherwise you wouldn't have all these stories of, of these fans harassing these wrestlers in public, especially with CM Punk, being stalked at the hotel that he was staying in. So it's just like, about his family, like his mom with the teenage son and the youngest son or whatever. So it's just like, it's one thing if Punk is walking past and waves to a kid, but to put yourselves in this position, to harass this guy when he said time and time again, do not approach me in public. That's my personal space. That's my business. That's my my private life, whatever. I like to be left alone. So my thing, and the thing about it is that, they want to say, never meet your heroes. But at the same time, I never go to my hero's hotel and stop. I never harass my heroes at a hotel. You never, ever, ever catch me, standing outside the hotel lobby or Shawn Michaels' hotel room is whatever, Roman, whatever. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that, because I respect their space and privacy enough, to wait for an opportune time at a meet and greet, book signing, photo op, any of those, professional environments. So if you want to meet somebody that bad, wait until you are in the proper environment. Like I said, whether it is, whether it's a book signing, photo op, meet and greets, all things like that. Like within that space, within that confined space, those are boundaries. Those are boundaries. When you wait and take your time to meet them, to interact with them in environments like that, those are, the best places to do so. Those are the safest places to interact with these people, instead of getting into invading their personal space and not respecting their space. So people just continue to be creepy, and then of course, getting in me and him keeping these business, and that's a whole nother topic. By itself, I'm not gonna tap into like that right now, but I'm just saying, like, for y'all to be this messy and harassing these people online, and just being weird and being ignorant and crazy, like, and the thing is, you wonder and see behavior like that is, is what grants you restraining orders. Like, don't be weird, don't be creepy. Mind the business that pays you, and leave these people alone. Because behavior like that makes it bad for everybody else. Behavior like that makes it bad for fans like myself, who respect space, who respect privacy, and would rather, wait until I'm in, the right environment to interact with them. I don't want to, have to, want to go to, like a meet and greet, or, or whatever the case is, and have to worry about them, having heavy security and worrying that them invading their space and making them feel uncomfortable. My thing is I never want to make these people feel uncomfortable. That's the last thing. And see, the thing is, behavior like that, that's the reason why Mercedes is so standoffish. That's the reason why she's so standoffish with these fans. Because this stuff has gone back, even back when she was with the company. And so like I said, that's the reason why some of these wrestlers are standoffish the way they are. And I never want to be in an environment where where one of them is standoffish towards me just because I was online, making bad for everybody else. So I say y'all need to cut that stuff out because it's gotten way out of hand. And so that's pretty much it right there. And so yeah, like as far as that, that pretty much concludes it. And we'll get back to this ESPYs in a minute. But before before I go, I'll let you give birthday shout outs. As I said before, on July 12th, Brock Lesnar turned 49, Sami Zayn turned 42. On July 13th, the legendary Harrison Ford, aka Han Solo and Indiana Jones, turned 84. Sean Waltman, aka X-Pac, 1-2-3 Kid, turned 54. And of course, on July 14th, Jeff Jarrett turned 59. On July 5th, that was July 14th. On July 15th, Forrest Whitaker turned 65. July 16th, Bobby Lashley turns 50. And of course, on July 17th, friend of the program, Kelsey Nicole Nelson turns 34. And that's it for the birthdays. And before I go, I'd like to give a word of wisdom. Is that when God realizes that He can get a blessing through you, He will give that blessing to you. And the thing is, God blesses those who are not focused on themselves, and that's my word of wisdom. Always remember that you are victorious because greater is He that's in you than He that's in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. So thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for listening, and may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.